This is the rainy season by Stephen King. It was 5:30 in the afternoon by the time John and Elise Graham finally found their way into the little village that lay at the center of Willow, Maine, like a fleck of grit at the center of some dubious pearl. The village was less than 5 miles from the Hempstead place, but they took 2 wrong turns on the way. When they finally arrived on Main Street, both of them were hot and out of sorts. The Ford's air conditioner had dropped dead on a trip from St. Louis, and it felt about 110 outside. Well, of course, it wasn't anything at all like that, John Graham thought. As the old-timers said, it wasn't the heat that gets you, it's the humidity. John felt that today would be almost possible to reach out and wring warm dribbles of water from the air itself. The sky overhead was a clear and open blue, but that high humidity made it feel as if it were going to rain at any minute. Oh, the hell with that. It felt as if it were raining already. "Oh, there's the market Millie Cousins told us about," Elise said and pointed. John grunted. "Doesn't exactly look like the supermarket of the future, does it?" "No," Elise said carefully. They were both being very careful today. John and Elise had been married almost 2 years, and they still, loved each other very much. But it had been a long trip cross-country from St. Louis, especially in a car with a broken radio and air conditioner. John had every hope they would enjoy summer here in Willow. They ought to, with the University of Missouri picking up the tab after all. But John thought it might take as long as a week for them to settle in and settle down. And when the weather turned yellow dog hot like this, well, an argument could spin itself out of thin air, you know. And neither John nor Elise wanted that kind of start to their summer. John drove slowly down Main Street toward the Willow General Mercantile and Hardware. There was a rusty sign with a blue eagle on it hanging from one corner of the porch, and he understood this was also the postal substation. General Mercantile looked sleepy in the afternoon light, with one single car, a beat-to-hell Volvo parked beside a sign advertising Italian sandwiches, pizza, groks, fishing, licenses. But compared with the rest of the town, it seemed to be all but bursting with life. There was a neon beer sign fizzing away in a window, although it would not be dark for almost 3 hours yet. Pretty radical, John thought. Sure hope the owner cleared that sign with the Board of Selectmen before he put it in. "I thought Maine turned into vacation land in the summer," Elise murmured. Judging from what we've seen so far, I think Willow must be a little off the tourist track, John replied. They got out of the car. They mounted the porch steps. An elderly man in a straw hat sat in a rocker with a cane seat, looking at them from shrewd little blue eyes. He was fiddling a homemade cigarette together and dribbling little bits of tobacco on the dog which lay crashed out at his feet. It was a big yellow dog of no particular make or model. Its paws lay directly beneath one of the rocker's curved runners. The old man took no notice of that dog and seemed not even to realize it was there. But the runner stopped a mere quarter of an inch from the vulnerable paws each time the old man rocked forward. Elise found this unaccountably fascinating. Good day to you, lady and man, the old gentleman said. "Oh, hello," Elise answered, and offered him a small tentative smile. "Yeah, hi," John said. You're Mr. Graham. Mr. and Mrs. Graham, ain't ye? Ones that took the Hempstead place for the summer. I heard you was writing some kind of a book, is it? Yes, on the in-migration of the French during the 17th century, John agreed. Well, it sure does get around, doesn't it? It do travel. Small town, don't you know? He stuck the cigarette in his mouth, where it promptly fell apart, sprinkling tobacco all over his legs and the dog's limp hide. The dog didn't stir. "Oh, flapdoodle," the old man said, and peeled the uncoiling paper from his lower lip. "Fudgesicle. Wife doesn't want me to smoke no more anyway. She says she read that smoking's what gives her cancer as well as my own self. We came into town for a few supplies," Elise said. "It's a wonderful old house, but the cupboard is bare." Good to meet you folks. I'm Henry Eden. He hung one bunched hand out in their direction. John shook with him, and Elise followed suit. They both did so with care, and the old man nodded as if to say he appreciated that.
I expected you half an hour ago. Eh? Must have taken a wrong turn or two, I suppose, eh? Got a lot of roads for such a small town, you know.
He smoked with a he coughed with a bronchial sound that turned into a phlegmy smoker's cough.
I got a power of roads in Willow. A power of roads.
John was frowning a little. Well, why would you be expecting us anyway?
Lucy Doucette called, said she saw the new folks go by.
He took out his pouch of top tobacco. He opened it. He reached inside and he fished out a packet of rolling papers.
Yeah. You don't know Lucy. She says you know her grandniece, Mrs.
Oh, this is Millie's cousin's great aunt we're talking about, then, Elise asked.
Yes'm.
Eden began to sprinkle the tobacco. Some of it landed on the cigarette paper, but most of it went on to the yellow dog below. Just as John Graham was beginning to wonder if maybe the dog was dead, it lifted its tail and, well, anyway, so much for that idea, he thought.
Yeah, and Willow, just about everybody's related to everybody else. Lucy lives down at the foot of the hill. I was going to call you myself, but since you said you was a-coming in anyway.
But, how did you know we'd be coming here? John asked. Henry Eden shrugged as if to say, well, where else is there to go anyway? Did you want to talk to us?
Well, I kind of have to,
Eden said. He sealed his cigarette and he stuck it in his mouth. John waited to see if it would fall apart as the other one had. He felt mildly disoriented by all this, as if he had walked unknowingly into some bucolic version of the CIA. The cigarette somehow held together this time. There was a charred scrap of sandpaper tacked to one of the arms of the rocker, and Eden struck the match on it and applied the flame to his cigarette, half of which incinerated on contact.
I think you and the missus might want to spend. I think you might want to spend tonight out of town, eh?
John blinked at him. Out of town? Why would we want to do that? We just got here. Oh, it's a good idea, though, mister. A female voice said from behind Eden. The Grahams looked around and they saw a tall woman with slumped shoulders standing inside the mercantile's rusty screen door. Her face looked out at them from just above an old tin sign advertising Chesterfield cigarettes. 21 great tobaccos make 20 wonderful smokes. The old woman opened the door and came out on the porch. Her face looked sallow and tired, but not stupid. She had a loaf of bread in one hand and a six-pack of Dawson's ale in the other. I'm Laura Stanton. It's very nice to meet you. We don't seem to be, we don't like to seem unsociable in Willow, but, well, it is the rainy season here tonight. John and Elise exchanged bewildered glances. Elise looked at the sky. Except for a few small fair-weather clouds, it was a lucid, unblemished blue. I know how it looks, the Stanton woman said, but that doesn't mean anything, does it, Henry?
No.
And Henry took one giant drag on his eroded cigarette and pitched it over the porch rail. You can feel the humidity in the air, the Stanton woman continued. That's the key, isn't it, Henry? The humidity.
Well, well, it is 7 years, to the day. 7 years today.
The very day, Laura Stanton agreed. They both looked expectantly at the Grahams. Pardon me, Elise said at last, but I don't understand any of what you're saying. Is this some sort of local joke? This time Henry Eden and Laura Stanton exchanged the glances, and then sighed at exactly the same moment as if on cue. I hate this, Laura Stanton said, although whether to the old man or to herself, John Graham had no idea.
What's got to be done,
Henry replied. She nodded and then sighed. It was the sigh of a woman who has set down a heavy burden and knows she must now pick it up again. It doesn't come up very often, you understand, because the rainy season only comes in Willow every 7 years.
June 17th, today.
Henry put in.
Rainy season every 7 years on June 17th. Never changes, not even in leap year. It's only the one night, yeah. But rainy season's what it's always been called, Damned if I know why. Hey, do you know why, Laura? Why we call it the rainy season?
No, Henry, I don't know, and I wish you'd stop interrupting me. I think you're getting senile.
Well, pardon me all to hell for living. I just fell off the hearse.
Elise threw John a glance that was a little frightened. All these people having us on, it asked, or are they both just crazy? Well, John didn't know, did he? But he wished heartily they had gone to Augusta for their supplies. They could have gotten a quick supper at one of the clam stands along Route 17. Now listen, the Stanton woman said kindly. We reserved a room for you at the Wonderview Motel out on Woolwich Road if you want it. The place was full, but the manager's my cousin, and he was able to clear one room out just for me. You two could go there and come back tomorrow and spend the rest of the summer with us. We'll be glad to have you, too. You know, if this is some kind of stupid joke, I'm not getting the point, okay? John said. No, Mr. Ram, it's not a joke. She glanced at Eden, who gave her a brisk little nod as if to say, Go on, don't quit now. The woman looked back at John and Elise, appeared to steel herself, and said, You see, folks, it rains toads here in Willow every 7 years. There, now you know. Toads? Ah, Elise said in a distant musing, Tell me I'm dreaming all this voice.
Toads? Yeah, toads,
Henry Eden affirmed cheerfully. John was looking cautiously around for help, if help should be needed. But Main Street was utterly deserted, and not only that he saw, but shuttered. Not a car moved on the road, not a single pedestrian was visible on either sidewalk. We could be in trouble here, he thought to himself. If these people are as nutty as they sound, we could be in real trouble, he thought. He suddenly found himself thinking of Shirley Jackson's short story, The Lottery, for the first time since he'd read it in junior high school. Now, don't you get the idea I'm standing here sounding like a fool because I want to, right? Laura Stanton said. The fact is, I'm just doing my duty. Henry, too, you see, it doesn't just sprinkle toads. It pours toads. You understand me? Come on, John said to Elise, taking her arm above the elbow. He gave them a smile that felt as genuine as a $6 bill. Yeah, nice to meet you folks, right? He guided Elise down the porch steps, looking back over his shoulder at the old man and slump-shouldered, pallid woman 2 or 3 times as he did. It didn't seem like a good idea to turn his back on them completely. The woman took a step toward them, and John almost stumbled off and fell off the last step. It is a little hard to believe, and you probably think I'm just as nutty as a fruitcake. No, not at all, John said. The large, phony smile on his face now felt as if it were approaching the lobes of his ears. Oh, dear God, why had he ever left St. Louis? He had driven nearly 1,500 miles with a busted radio and air conditioner to meet Farmer Jekyll and Mrs. Hyde. That's all right, though, Laura Stanton said. The weird serenity in her face and voice made him stop by the Italian sandwiches sign, still 6 feet from the ford. Even people who heard of rains of frogs and toads and birds and such don't have a clear idea of what happens here in Willow every 7 years. Take a little advice, though. If you're going to stay, you'd be well off to stay in the house. You'll most likely be all right in the house. Yes, you might want to close the shutters, though. Well, yeah, we'll do that, Elise said faintly, and then John had the Ford's passenger door open and was nearly shoveling her inside. Yeah, you bet, he said, as through a large frozen grin. And come back and see us tomorrow, all right? Eden called as John hurried around the front of the Ford to his side. You feel a mite safer around us tomorrow, I think.
Yeah, if you're still around at all, of course.
John waved, got behind the wheel, and pulled out. There was silence on the front porch for a moment as the old man and the woman with the pale, unhealthy skin watched the Ford head back up Main Street. It left at a considerable higher speed than that at which it had come.
Well, we done it,
The old man said contentedly. Yes, yes. And I feel like a horse's ass. I always feel like a horse's ass when I see the way they look at us. At me.
Yeah. Oh, well, it's only once every 7 years, and it has to be done that way because...
Yes, yes, I know, because it's part of the ritual.
It's the ritual, all right.
The woman booted the dog and turned the old man with her hands clamped on her hips. That is the stinkiest mutt in 4 towns, Henry Eden. The dog arose with a grunt and staggered down the porch stairs, pausing only long enough to favor Laura Stanton with a reproachful gaze as he farted one more time in her general direction.
Aye, he can't help it.
She sighed, looking up the road after the ford. It's too bad. They seem like such nice people.
Yeah, nor can we help that, can we now?
And Henry began to roll himself another smoke. So the Grahams ended up eating dinner at a clam stand after all. They found one in the neighboring town of Woolwich, home of the Scenic Wonderview Motel. John pointed out to Elise in a vain effort to raise a smile, and sat at a picnic table under an old overspreading blue spruce. The clam stand was in sharp, almost jarring contrast to the buildings on Willow's Main Street. The parking lot was nearly full. Most of the cars, like theirs, had out-of-state license plates. And yelling kids with ice cream on their faces chased after one another while their parents strolled about, slapped black flies, and waited for their numbers to be announced over the loudspeaker. The stand had a fairly wide menu. In fact, John thought you could have just about anything you wanted, as long as it wasn't too big to fit in a deep fat fryer. I don't know if I can spend 2 days in that town, let alone 2 months, Elise said. The bloom is off the rose for this mother's daughter, Johnny.
It was just a joke, that's all. You know, the kind natives playing the tourists. They went too far, that's all. They're probably kicking themselves for that right now.
Oh, no, John, they look serious. How am I supposed to go back there and face that old man after that?
I wouldn't worry about it. Judging from his cigarettes, he'd reached the stage of life where he's meeting everyone for the first time, even his oldest friends.
Elise tried to control the twitching corners of her mouth and gave up a burst out laughing. You're evil, Johnny.
Honest, maybe, but not evil. I won't say he was demented, but he did look as if he needed a road map to find his way to the bathroom.
Yes, but Johnny, where do you suppose everyone else was? The town looked, totally deserted.
Bean supper at the Grange or card party at Eastern Star, probably.
He peeked into the clam basket.
You didn't eat much, love.
Yes, love wasn't very hungry, Johnny.
I'll tell you, there was a joke. Lighten up.
You really, really sure that's all it was, Johnny?
Really, really. I mean, hey, every 7 years it rains toads in Willow, Maine. Sounds like an outtake from a Stephen Wright monologue.
She smiled wanly. Yes, but it doesn't rain, toads. It pours.
Yeah, they subscribe the old fisherman's credo, I guess. If you're going to tell one, tell a whopper. When I was a kid at sleepaway camp, it used to be snipe hunts, you know? This really isn't much different. When you stop to think about it, it really isn't that surprising.
What isn't?
People who make the most of their yearly income dealing with summer people should develop a summer camp mentality.
That woman didn't act like it was a joke. I'll tell you the truth, Johnny, she sort of scared me.
John Graham's normally
pleasant face grew stern and hard. The expression did not look at home on his face, but neither did it look faked or insincere.
Yeah, I know.
He picked up their wrappings and napkins in plastic baskets.
There's going to be an apology made for that. I find foolishness for the sake of foolishness agreeable enough, but when someone scares my wife, hell, they scared me too. A little. I'll draw the line. You ready to go back, hon?
Can you find it again? He grinned, immediately looked more like himself.
Yeah, I left a trail of breadcrumbs.
How wise you are, my darling. She was smiling again, and John was glad to see it. She drew a deep breath. It did wonders with the front of her blue chambray work shirt she was wearing. And let it out. The humidity seems to have dropped a bit.
Yeah.
John deposited their waste into a trash basket with a left-handed hook shot and then winked at her.
So much for the rainy season.
But by the time they turned on the Hempstead Road, the humidity had returned with a vengeance. John felt as if his own T-shirt had turned into a clammy mass of cobweb clinging to his chest and back. The sky, now turning a delicate shade of evening primrose, was still clear, but he felt that if he had a straw he could have drunk directly from the air. There was only one other house on the road, at the foot of the long hill with the Hempstead place at the very top. As they drove past it, John saw the silhouette of a woman standing motionless at one of the windows and looking out at them. Well, there's your friend Millie's great aunt. She sure was a sport to call the local crazies down at the general store and tell them we were coming. I wonder if they would have dragged out the whoopee cushions and joy buzzers and chattery teeth if we'd stayed a little longer. Yeah, well, that dog had his own built-in joy buzzer. Phew. John laughed, and they nodded. 5 minutes later, John and Elise were turning into their own driveway. It was badly overgrown with weeds and dwarf bushes, and John intended to take care of that little situation before the summer got much older. The Hempstead place itself was a rambling country farmhouse, added to by succeeding generations whenever the need, or maybe just the urge, to do some building happened to strike. A barn stood behind it, connected to the house by 3 rambling zigzag sheds. In this flush of early summer, 2 of the 3 sheds were almost buried in fragrant drifts of honeysuckle. It commanded a gorgeous view of the town, especially on a clear night like this one. John wondered briefly just how it could be so clear when the humidity was so high. Elise joined him in front of the car, and they stood out there for a moment, arms around each other's waists, looking at the hills which rolled gently off in the direction of Augusta, losing themselves in the shadows of the evening. Oh, it's beautiful, Johnny. And listen. There was a marshy area of reeds and high grass 50 yards or so behind the barn, and in it a chorus of frogs sang and thumped and snapped the elastics God had for some reason stretched in their throats. Well, the frogs are all present and accounted for anyway. No toads, though, John said, and he looked up at the clear sky in which Venus had now opened her coldly burning eye. There they are, Elise, up there, clouds of toads, she giggled. Tonight in the small town of Willow, he intoned, a cold front of toads met a warm front of newts, and the result was, You, stop it now, let's just go in. And so they went in. They did not pass go, they did not collect $200. Instead, they went directly to bed. Elise was startled out of a satisfying drowse an hour or so later by a thump on the roof. She got up on her elbows. What was that, Johnny? Huh? What? Toads, Elise thought, and giggled, but it was a nervous giggle. She got up and went to the window, and before she could look for anything which might have fallen on the ground, she found herself looking up at the sky. It was still cloudless, and now shot with 1,000,000,000,000-spangled stars. She looked at them, for a moment hypnotized with their simple, silent beauty. Thud. She jerked back from the window and looked up at the ceiling. Whatever it was had just hit the roof overhead. Johnny, wake up! Huh? What? He sat up, his hair all tangled tufts and clock springs. It started. The rain of frogs. Toads. Ellie, what are you talking about? Thud. He looked around, then swung his feet out of bed. This is ridiculous, he said softly and angrily. What do you mean? Thud crash! There was a tinkle of glass downstairs. Oh, damn it. He got up and yanked on his blue jeans. Enough. This is just frickin' enough. Several soft thuds hit the side of the house and the roof. She cringed against them, frightened now. What do you mean, Johnny? I mean that crazy woman and the old man and some of their friends are out there throwing things at the house. And I'm going to put a stop to it right now. Maybe they held on to a customer shivering the new folks in this little town, but thud, smash from the kitchen. Damn it! John yelled and ran out into the hall. Don't leave me, Elise cried out after him. He flicked up the hallway light switch just before plunging downstairs. Soft thumps and thuds struck the house in increasing rhythm, and Elise had time to think, how many people from town are out there anyway? How many does it take to do that, and what are they throwing, rocks wrapped in pillowcases? John reached the foot of the stairs and went into the living room. There was a large window in there which gave on the same view which they had admired earlier. The window was broken. Shards and splinters of glass lay scattered across the rug. He started toward the window. meaning to yell something at them about how he was going to get his shotgun. Then he looked at the broken glass again, remembered his feet were bare, and stopped. For a moment he didn't know what to do, and then he saw a dark shape lying in the broken glass. The rock one of the imbecilic, interbred bastards had used to break his window. And then he saw red. He might have charged the window anyway, bare feet or no bare feet, but just then the rock twitched. That's no rock, he thought. That's a... John! The house rang with those soft thuds now. It was as if they were being bombarded with large, rotten, soft hailstones. John, what is it? A toad, he said stupidly. He was still looking at the twitching shape in the litter of broken glass and spoke more to himself than to his wife. He raised his eyes and looked at the window. What he saw outside struck him mute with horror and incredulity. He could no longer see the hills or the horizons. Hell, he could barely see the barn, and that was less than 40 feet away. The air was stuffed with falling shapes. 3 more of them came in through the broken glass, and no, they were not Zubats or Pidgeys or Geodudes. No. They were, in fact, toads. One landed on the floor not far from its twitching mate. It came down on a sharp sliver of window glass, and black fluid burst from its body in thick ropes. Elise screamed. The other 2 caught in the curtains. And the curtains began to twist and jerk as if in a fitful breeze. One of them managed to disentangle itself. It struck the floor and then hopped toward John. He groped at the wall with a hand, which felt as if it were no part of him at all. His fingers stumbled across the light switch and flipped it up. The thing hopping across the glass-littered floor toward him was a toad. But it was also not a toad. Its green-black body was too large, too lumpy. Its black and gold eyes bulged like freakish eggs, and bursting from its mouth, unhinging the jaw, was a bouquet of large, needle-sharp teeth. It made a thick croaking noise and bounded at John as if on springs. Behind it more toads were falling in through the window. The ones which struck the floor had either died outright or been crippled, but many others, too many others, used the curtains as a safety net and tumbled to the floor unharmed. "Get out of here!" John yelled to his wife, and kicked at the toad, which, it was insane, but it was true, was attacking him. It did not flinch back from his foot, but sank that mouthful of crooked needles first over and over into his, and then into his toes. The pain was immediate, fiery and immense. Without thinking, he made a half-turn, and he kicked the wall as hard as he could. He felt his toes break, but the toad broke as well, splattering its black blood under the wainscoting in a half-circle like a fan. His toes had become a crazy road sign, pointing in all directions at once. Elise was standing frozen in the hall doorway. She could now hear window glass shattering all over the house. She had put on one of John's T-shirts after they had finished making love, and now she was clutching the neck of it with both hands. The air was full of ugly, croaking sounds. "Get out, Elise!" John screamed. He turned, shaking his bloody foot. The toad which had bitten him was dead, but its huge and improbable teeth were all still caught in his flesh like a tangle of fish hooks. This time he kicked at the air like a man punting a football, and the toad finally flew. The fading living room carpet was now covered with bloated, hopping bodies. And they were all hopping at them. John ran to the doorway. His foot came down on one of the toads, and it burst open. His heel skidded in the cold jelly which popped out of its body, and he almost fell. Elise relinquished her death grip on the neck of a T-shirt and grabbed him. They stumbled into the hall together, into the darkness, and John slammed the door, catching one of the toads in the act of hopping through. The door cut the toad in half. The top half twitched and jutted on the floor, its toothy, black-lipped mouth opening and closing, its black and golden pop eyes goggling at them. Elise clapped her hands to the sides of her face and began to wail hysterically. John reached out to her. She shook her head and cringed away from him, her hair falling over her face. The sound of the toads hitting the roof was bad, but the croakings and chirpings were worse because these latter sounds were coming from inside the house and all over the house. He thought of the old man sitting on the porch of the General Mercantile in his rocker, calling after them, "Might want to close your shutters." Ah, Christ, why didn't I believe him? And on the heels of that, how was I supposed to believe him? Nothing in my whole life prepared me to believe him. And below, the sound of toads thudding onto the ground outside, and toads squashing themselves to guts and goo on the roof, he heard a more ominous sound. The chewing and splintering sound of the toads in the living room starting to bite their way through. Right through the door. He could actually see it settling more firmly against its lunges as more and more toads crowded their weight against it. He turned around and saw toads hopping down the main staircase by the dozens. "Elise!" He grabbed at her. She kept shrieking and pulling away from him. A sleeve of the t-shirt tore free. He looked at the ragged chunk of cloth in his hand, with perfect stupidity for a moment, and then let it flutter down to the ground. "Elise! Damn it!" She shrieked and drew back again. Now the first toads had reached the hall floor and were hopping eagerly towards them. There was a brittle tinkle as the fanlight over the door shattered. A toad whizzed through it, struck the carpet, lay on its back, mottled pink belly exposed, webbed feet twitching in the air. He grabbed his wife, shook her. "We have to go down to the cellar. We'll be safe in the cellar." "No!" Elise screamed at him. Her eyes were giant floating zeros, and he understood she was not refusing his idea of retreating to the cellar, but refusing anything as the toads continued to fall upon them. There was no time for gentle measures or soothing words. He bunched the front of the shirt she was wearing in his fist and yanked her down the hall like a cop dragging a recalcitrant prisoner to a squad car. One of the toads, which had been the vanguard of those hurrying down the stairs, leaped gigantically and snicked its mouthful of darning needles shut around a chunk of space occupied by Elisa's bare heel a mere second before. Halfway down the hall, she got the idea and began to come with him of her own accord. They reached the door. John turned the knob and yanked it, but the door wouldn't move. "Damn!" he cried and yanked it again. No good. Nothing. "John, hurry!" She looked back over her shoulder, saw toads flooding down the hall toward them, taking huge, crazy springs over each other's back, falling on each other, striking the faded Rambler Rose wallpaper, landing on their backs and being overrun by their mates. They were all teeth and gold black eyes and heaving leathery bodies. "John, please, please." And then one of them leaped and battened on her left thigh just above the knee. Elise screamed and seized it, her fingers punching through its skin into its dark liquid workings. She tore it free, and for a moment as she raised her arms, the horrid thing was right in front of her eyes, its teeth gnashing like a piece of some small but homicidal factory machine. She threw it as hard as she could. It cartwheeled in the air and then splattered against the wall just above the opposite kitchen door. It did not fall, but it stuck fast in the glue of its own guts. "John, oh God, John!" John Graham suddenly realized what he was doing wrong. He reversed the direction of his efforts, pushing the door instead of pulling it. It flew open, almost spilling him forward and down the stairs, and he wondered briefly if his mother had had any kids that lived. He flailed at the railing, caught hold of it, and then Elise almost knocked him down again, bolting past him down the stairs, screaming like a fire bell in the night. Oh, she's going to fall, but she can't fall. She had helped before. She's going to fall and break her neck. Yes, but somehow Elise did not fall. Elise reached the cellar's earthen floor and collapsed in a sobbing heap, clutching at her torn thigh. Toads were leaping and hopping in through the open cellar doorway. John caught his balance, turned, and slapped the door shut. Several of the toads, caught on their side of the door, leaped right off the landing, struck the stairs, and fell through the spaces between the risers. Another took an almost vertical leap straight up, and John was suddenly shaken by wild laughter. A sudden bright image of Mr. Toad of Toad Hall and a pogo stick instead of a motor car had come to him. Still laughing hysterically, balled his right hand into a fist. He punched the toad dead center in its pulsing, flabby chest at the top of its leap, while it hung in perfect equilibrium between gravity and its own expended energy. It zoomed off into the shadows, and John heard a soft bonk as it struck the furnace. He scrabbled at the wall in the dark. His fingers found the raised cylinder, which was the old-fashioned toggle light switch. He flipped it, and that was when Elise began to scream again. A toad had gotten tangled in her hair. It croaked and twisted and turned and bit at her neck, rolling itself into something which resembled a large misshapen curler. Elise surged to her feet and ran in a large circle, miraculously avoiding a tumble over the boxes which had been stacked and stored down there. She struck one of the cellar's support posts, rebounded, then turned and banged the back of her head twice briskly against it. There was a thick, gushing sound, a squirt of black fluid, and then the toad fell out of Elise's hair, tumbling down the back of her t-shirt, leaving dribbles of ichor. Elise screamed then, and the lunacy in that sound chilled John's blood. John half ran, half stumbled down the cellar stairs and then folded her in his arms. She fought him at first and then surrendered. Her screams gradually dissolved into steady weeping. And then, over the soft thud of the toads striking the house and the grounds, they heard the croaking of the toads which had fallen down here. She drew away from John, her eyes shifting wildly side to side in their shiny white sockets. "Where are they? Where are they?" Her voice was hoarse, almost a bark from all the screaming she had done. "Where are they, John?" But they didn't have to look. The toads had already seen them and came hopping eagerly towards them. The Grams retreated, and John saw a rusty shovel leaning against the wall. He grabbed it and beat the toads to death with it as they came. Only one got past him. It leaped from the floor to a box, and from the box it jumped at Elise, catching the cloth of her shirt in its nasty little teeth and dangling there between her breasts, legs kicking. "Stand still!" John barked at her. He dropped the shovel. He took 2 steps forward, grabbed the toad, and hauled it off in a shirt. It took a chunk of cloth with it. The cotton strip hung from one of its fangs as it twisted and pulsed and wriggled in John's hands. Its hide was warty, dry, but horridly warm, and somehow dizzy. He snapped his hands and fists, popping the toad. Blood and slime squirted out from between his fingers. Less than a dozen of the little monsters had actually made it through the cellar door, and soon they were all dead. John and Elise clung to each other, listening to the steady rain of toads outside. John looked over at the low cellar windows. They were packed and dark, and he suddenly saw the house as it must look from the outside, buried in a drift of squirming, lunging, leaping toads.
We've got to block the windows. Their weight's going to break them. At least if that happens, they'll pour in.
Block. With what are we going to block the windows? What can we use? John looked around and saw several sheets of plywood, elderly and dark, leaning against one wall. Not much, perhaps, but something. And he couldn't create prims on demand as we could here to block them out, but had to make do with what he had at hand.
"That," he said. "Help me break it up into smaller pieces."
They worked quickly and frantically. There were only 4 windows in the cellar, and the very narrowness had caused the panes to hold longer than the larger windows upstairs had done. They were just finishing the last when they heard the glass of the first shatter behind the plywood. But the plywood held. They staggered into the middle of the cellar again. Yes, it is convenient, isn't it, Starry? Perhaps it's Gibbs's basement, and, Gibbs would always have plywood of some sort down there, I think. As they say, they staggered into the middle of the cellar again, John limping on his broken foot. From the top of the stairway came the sound of the toads, eating their way through the cellar door. What do we do if they eat their way all the way through it?
"I don't know,"
John said. And that that was when the door of the coal chute, unused for years but still intact, suddenly swung open under the weight of all the toads which had fallen or hopped onto it, and hundreds of them poured out in a high-pressure jet. This time Elise could not scream. She had damaged her vocal cords too badly for that. It did not last long for the Grams in the cellar after the coal chute door gave way. Yes, but until it was over, John Graham screamed quite adequately for both of them. Anyway,
By midnight, the downpour of toads in Willow had slackened off to a mild, croaking drizzle. At 1:30 in the morning, the last toad fell out of the dark and starry sky, landed in a pine tree near the lake, hopped to the ground, and disappeared into the night. And it was over for another 7 years. Now, around 5:15, the first light began to creep into the sky and over the land. Willow was buried beneath a writhing, hopping, complaining carpet of toads. The buildings on Main Street had lost their angles and corners. Everything was rounded and hunched and twitching. The sign on the highway which read, "Welcome to Willow, Maine, the friendly place." Yes, the sign looked as if someone had put about 30 shotgun shells in it.
Flying toads, of course, had made the holes. The sign in front of the General Mercantile, which advertised Italian sandwiches, pizza, crocs, fishing licenses, had been knocked over altogether, and now toads played leapfrog on and around it. There was a small toad convention going on top of the gas pumps at Donny Seneca. Two toads sat upon the slowly swinging iron arm of the weather vane, atop the Willow stove shop like a small misshapen children on a merry-go-round. At the lake, the few floats which had been put out this early, only the hardiest swimmers dared the waters of Lake Willow before 4th of July, however, toads or no toads. Yes, these floats were piled high with toads, and the fish were going crazy with so much food almost within reach. Every now and then there was a plip-plip sound, as one or two of the toads jostling for place on the floats were knocked off, and some hungry trout or salmon's breakfast was served. The roads in and out of town, and there were a lot of them for such a small town as Henry Eden had said. The roads, each of them, every one of them, were paved with toads. The power was out for the time being. Free-falling toads had broken the power lines in any number of places. Most of the gardens were ruined, but Willow wasn't much of a farming community anyway. Several people kept fairly large dairy herds, but they had all been safely tucked away for the night. Dairy farmers in Willow knew all about the rainy season and had no wish to lose their milkers to the hordes of leaping carnivorous toads. What in the hell would you tell the insurance company, As the light brightened over the Hempstead place, it revealed drifts of dead toads on the roof, rain gutters that had been splintered loose by dive-bombing toads, a dooryard that was alive with toads. They hopped in and out of the barn, they stuffed the chimneys, they hopped nonchalantly around the tires of John Graham's Ford, and they sat in croaking rows on the front seat of his car like a church congregation waiting for the services to start. Heaps of toads, mostly dead, lay in drifts against the building. Some of these drifts were 6 feet deep. At 6:05, the sun cleared the horizon, and as its rays struck them, the toads began to melt. Their skins bleached, turned white, then appeared become transparent. Soon a vapor that gave off a vaguely swampy smell began to trail up from the bodies, and little bubbly rivulets of moisture began to course down them. Their eyes fell in or fell out, depending on their positions when the sun hit them. Their skins popped with an audible sound, and for perhaps 10 minutes it sounded as if champagne corks were being drawn all over Willow. They decomposed rapidly after that, melting into puddles of cloudy white schmeg that looked like, well, never mind what it looked like. This liquid ran down the pitches of the Hempstead Place's roof in little creeks and dripped from the eaves like pus. The living toads died. The dead ones simply rotted into that white fluid. It bubbled briefly, then sank lowly into the ground. Slowly. The earth sent up tiny ribbons of steam, and for a little while every field in Willow looked like the site of a dying volcano. By 6:45 was over, except for the repairs. The residents were used to them. It seemed a small price to pay for another 7 years of quiet prosperity in this mostly forgotten Maine backwater. At 8:05, Laura Stanton's beat-to-hell Volvo turned into the dooryard of the General Mercantile. When Laura got out, she looked paler and sicker than ever. She was sick, in fact. She still had the 6-pack of Dawson's ale in one hand, but now all the bottles were empty, and she had a vicious hangover. Henry Eden came out on the porch, and his dog walked behind him. "Henry, you get that mud inside. I'm going to turn right around and go home," Laura said from the foot of the stairs. "Now, Laura, you know he can't help what he does." "That doesn't mean I have to be around when he lets it rip. I mean it now, Henry. My head hurts like a bastard, and the last thing I need this morning is to listen to that stupid dog play Hail Columbia out of its butthole." "Go inside, Toby," Henry said, holding the door open. Toby looked up at him with wet eyes, and as if to say, "Do I have to? Things are just getting interesting out here." "Go on now, Henry." Toby walked back inside. Henry shut the door. Laura waited until she heard the latch snick shut. Then she mounted the steps. "Your sign fell over." She handed him the carton of empties. "I got eyes, woman." Henry was not in the best temper this morning himself. Few people in Willow would be. Sleeping through a rain of toads was a damned hard piece of work, wasn't it? Thank God it only came once every 7 years, or a man might be apt to go crap out of his mind. You should have taken it in, she said. Henry muttered something she didn't quite catch. What was that, Henry?
I said we should have tried harder. They was a nice young couple. We should have tried harder, Laura.
She felt a touch of compassion for the old man in spite of her thudding head and laid a hand on his arms. It's the ritual, Henry, you know that.
Yeah, well, sometimes I just feel like saying frig the ritual.
Henry! She drew her hand back, shocked in spite of herself. But he wasn't getting any younger, she reminded herself. The wheels were getting a little rusty upstairs, no doubt.
I don't care. They seem like a nice young couple, that John and Elise. You said so, too. Don't try to say you didn't.
Yes, I thought the Grahams were very nice, but we can't help that, Henry. Why, you said so yourself just last night.
I know.
We don't make them stay, Henry, you know that. Just the opposite. We warn them out of town. They decide to stay themselves. They always decide to stay, don't they? They make their own decision. That's part of the ritual, too.
I know.
Henry drew a deep breath and grimaced.
And I hate the smell afterwards. Whole damn town smells like clabbered milk.
It'll be gone by noon, you know that.
I just about hope I'm underground when it comes around again, Lord. And if I ain't, I hope somebody else gets the job of meeting whoever comes just before the rainy season. I like being able to pay my bills when they come due just as well as everybody else. I tell you, a man gets tired of toads, even if it is only once every 7 years. A man can get damn tired of toads, Laura.
Yes, a woman too, Henry.
Well, I guess we might try putting some of this damn mess right, don't you?
Sure, Henry. You know, Henry, we don't make the ritual, we only follow it.
I know that, but...
And things could change. There's no telling when or why, but they could. This might be the last time we have the rainy season. Or next time no one from out of town might come.
Oh, don't say that, Laura. If no one comes, the toads might not go away like they do when the sun hits them.
There, you see, you've come around to my side of it after all, Henry.
Well, it's a long time, ain't it? 7 years is a long time.
Yes, Henry, a long time.
They was a nice young couple, though, weren't they?
Yes, Henry, they were.
Awful way to go.
After a moment, Henry asked her if she would help him set his sign up again. In spite of her nasty headache, Laura said she would. She didn't like to see Henry so low, especially when he was feeling low over something he could control no more than he could control the tides of the phases of the moon. By the time they'd finished, he seemed to feel a little better.
7 years a hell of a long time.
It is, she thought, but it always passes. The rainy season always comes around again. The outsiders come with it. Always two of them, always a man and a woman. We always tell them exactly what's going to happen, and they don't believe it. And what happens? Happens. Come on, you old crock, she said. Offer me a cup of coffee before my head splits wide open. Henry offered Laura a cup of coffee, and before they had finished, the sounds of hammers and saws had begun in town. Outside the window, they could look down Main Street and see people folding back their shutters, talking and laughing. The air was warm and dry. The sky overhead was a pale and hazy blue. And in Willow, the rainy season was over.